What is whataboutism? It's no secret that politicians and diplomats are masters of dodging questions and sidetracking the conversation. One strategy that characterizes that tactic has been dubbed whataboutism. It's one of the most effective ways to avoid any wrongdoing, and former US President Donald Trump used it way too often.
He said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
Whataboutism is the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter-accusation or raising a different issue. Western scholars have labeled it a propaganda technique, where criticism is leveled back at the initial critic to distract and discredit them.
And the reason it is dangerous is because it implies that all actions, regardless of context, share a moral equivalency. And since nobody is perfect, all criticism is hypocritical and everybody should do whatever they want. It is a depressingly effective tool.
A great example of whataboutism was displayed during the Putin-Biden summit in Geneva earlier this month, when the Russian leader batted away a question about his crackdown on political opponents.
The list of your political opponents who are dead, prisoned, or jailed is long. Alexei Navalny's organization calls for free and fair elections, an end to corruption. But Russia has outlawed that organization, calling it extremist. And you have now prevented anyone who supports him to run for office. So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
Putin offered nothing in response. Instead, he justified the Kremlin's crackdown on dissidents by comparing it to the US's prosecution of the January 6 rioters, or as he called them, the group that went to Congress with political demands after the election. He also said he was trying to avoid the disorder of a popular movement like Black Lives Matter.
My response is kind of what I communicated, that I think that's a ridiculous comparison.
And in an earlier interview with NBC, Putin was called out directly for his use of the tactic.
Would you like me to keep answering?
We call what you're doing now whataboutism. What about this? What about that? It's a way of not answering the question. Let me ask you a direct question. Did you? Let me ask you.
I will look.
Let me ask.
I will look. No. Let me answer it. You've asked me a question. You're not liking my answer, so you're interrupting me right away. This is inappropriate.
Critics say Putin is employing past Soviet practices that it used during the Cold War. Whenever the US criticized the USSR's human rights abuses, the Kremlin was quick to say, what about in America, where they lynch black people? And the strategy is still widely being used today. China has received its fair share of criticism from the US and has always been quick to respond. When the US State Department tweeted criticism of China's crackdown on Hong Kong, China's foreign ministry spokesperson tweeted, "I can't breathe," a reference to George Floyd's last words. And China used the reference again during a heated meeting with the US in Alaska earlier this year. But it's not just the West's traditional adversaries who engage in whataboutism. Israel has been utilizing the strategy for years. During its latest bombing campaign on Gaza, Israel justified the killing of more than 200 Palestinians by pointing out that Israel also had casualties. When confronting criticism for its disproportionate use of force, Israel has always been quick to say, what about Hamas? And late last year, the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo republished cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad that were found to be sacrilegious by Muslims around the world. Later in the same month, 2 people were stabbed at Charlie Hebdo's offices. But instead of tackling the pouring outrage from the cartoons, Macron countered with his own, "What about Islam?"
Islam is a religion that is in crisis today all over the world. We don't just see it in our country. It is a deep crisis that is linked to tensions between fundamentalism, precisely religious and political projects, which you can see in all parts of the world.
So it seems that it's only the West's traditional adversaries like Russia and China that are constantly accused of using whataboutism, but never their own allies. So is there a double standard on how the term is applied?